sandwich is a story that we're going to read about here. Some time ago, an incident occurred involving a socially inept American student who became the butt of his classmates' derisive behavior. Matters reached a point at which one of the tormentors regularly invaded the oppressed student's knapsack, stole the sandwich the latter had prepared for lunch, and proceeded to eat it himself. Endeavors to enlist the aid of fellow classmates in order to identify the thief or to prevail upon him to put an end to the practice were of no avail. So he's being abused, mistreated, and actually his lunch is being stolen every day. Finally, the victim, who excelled academically as a chemistry student, took matters into his own hands and proceeded one day to lace his sandwich with a poison. In the midst of an afternoon lecture, one of the members of the class became violently ill. In the course of the ensuing tumult, the victimized student revealed what he had done, explaining that he had resorted to poisoning the sandwich in order to establish the identity of the thief. Thereupon, the rightful owner of the sandwich administered a readily prepared antidote to counter the effect of what otherwise would have been a lethal poison. So quite a strange story where this student who's being so mistreated decides to get to the bottom of things by poisoning his sandwich, which was about to be stolen. Our question then becomes, is that justified? Is that an appropriate thing to do? Would the Torah allow you to defend yourself in that kind of way, possibly harming the thief pretty badly? Does anyone want to comment on that? Do we think it's right or wrong?
I don't know. It was potential. It didn't happen.
You mean he came out okay?
He got information that he needed. He knew had an antidote, and so it was all controlled.
Well, what if the student, the thief, would have gotten sick only a little later, not in class? Would he be able to give him the antidote in time? It can get tricky.
I mean, it could get tricky, right? It could have been a problem if he got sick later on, but no one would have really known.
Well, let's look at another case with a similar idea. Much simpler, though. A thief gained entrance to an upper story of a dwelling by means of a rope. In order to prevent repeated burglary, may the owner of the house replace the rope with a weaker one that will snap and cause the burglar to fall and injure himself? Can I get the burglar, give him a taste of his own medicine, where he's using a rope to get into my house? I'm going to change the rope to one that is going to entrap him. When he pulls on it, he's going to fall and hurt himself, and that'll be the last time he tries to break into my house. Would the Torah allow me to do that?
Well, you're looking at things that are not equal. Like the first one is the guy could die and he was just stealing a lunch. The other one, breaking in, stealing goods, but he could fall, injure himself, break his neck, and be dead. The burglar. So they're not exactly equal, but you have to do something to defend yourself to a degree. I don't know, but the answer is.
Okay. Well, we have Alan joining us. Hi, Alan. Oh, he's trying to connect. Hi, Alan. Good to see you. So we're trying to figure out if it's okay to defend ourselves from theft or anything else in a way that can harm the one who's trying to commit the crime. If a burglar is using a rope to climb into my house, can I change that rope to a weaker one so he'll fall and hurt himself and never come back? It's interesting that this has been discussed in court. Long time ago, in the 1840s or so, first in England, then in the United States. And in England, where people were using spring guns to protect their property, so if hunters or other people would trespass onto the private property, the spring gun would go off and automatically shoot them. And the court ruled that it was allowed as long as there was notice. If you put up a sign that said, watch out for the spring guns, you were off the hook. In the United States, the same thing came up, and the court actually did not allow it. But let's see if we could figure out what the Torah would say. And our example, our precedent that may be able to help us with this is a story from the Talmud right here in Tractate Derech Eretz. It happened with Rabbi Yeshua that he hosted someone. Rabbi Yeshua provided food and drink and brought him up to the roof to sleep, but removed the ladder from below. So he had this guest and he didn't know if he can trust him. So he fed him and he took care of him and he gave him a bed on the roof, which apparently was a common thing to do, but he took away the ladder once the guy went upstairs. What did the individual do? He got up in the middle of the night, took valuables and wrapped them up in his cloak. When he tried to descend, he fell down and injured his neck because the ladder was missing. In the morning, Rabbi Yeshua rose and found the guest had fallen. He said, "Empty one, such is the conduct of people like you. This is how you behave. You try to rob me, and then you can't even climb off the roof." The guest said, "Rabbi, I did not know that you removed the ladder." "Empty one, do you not know that from yesterday we were careful about you?" Rabbi Yeshua replied. So it seems that Rabbi Yeshua, who suspected this guy all along, he had taken measures to protect himself. Hi, Linda. And he said, "I'm going to remove the ladder so that if this guy tries to steal in the middle of the night, he can't get down without hurting himself." Would this be a precedent? Would this maybe prove that we can set up a trap for a thief? So can I booby trap the door of my house? So if somebody tries to break in, he gets automatically hurt? Am I allowed to do that?
Well, what if he's in a border town?
Okay, and if it's in a dangerous place, am I allowed to do that?
Because then you're preventing everybody else from coming in and doing the harm to the multiples inside.
Yeah, kind of like we talked about in the other class. That's a good point. Well, the interesting thing is that in this case of Rabbi Yeshua, it doesn't seem to give us evidence to support that. I can argue that just like he took away the ladder, I can lay a trap for the thief and booby trap my door and get him if he breaks in. But I can also argue that Rabbi Yeshua did nothing. All he did was remove the ladder so that the guy should not climb down. He should be trapped on the roof so that he could be confronted and have to return the stolen goods. The guy was an idiot though, and he started climbing down without the ladder and hurt himself. But that wasn't the plan. Rabbi Yeshua just removed the ladder to trap him. He didn't expect the guy to start going down with no ladder. So that would indicate that you can be smart and protect yourself and take the ladder away before the thief gets away, but not necessarily that you can physically harm him in your attempt to prevent him from robbing your home. Let's try let's try another one. This one is a little more complicated. Here we have a discussion that involves the agricultural laws that applied in the land of Israel and actually also apply in this particular case outside of the land of Israel. So these laws include what's called orla and revoi. Orla means that the first 3 years of a tree, we do not eat the fruits. The Torah forbids eating the fruits of a tree for the first 3 years. We just let them fall and we don't touch them. The 4th year, which is called revoi, we are allowed to eat the fruits. But those fruits have to be taken to Jerusalem, and you have to make a party with them and invite the poor people and others and celebrate in Jerusalem with your new fruits. And finally, in the 5th year, you go to regular business. Another option for the 4th year is to redeem the fruits, buy them back which in other words means that we pay the value of the fruits and take that value to Jerusalem to buy other foods. But meanwhile, the original fourth year's fruits become just regular and you can use them for whatever you like. So here we have a discussion for how would you mark these fruits? How would you indicate that people should know which fruits are from when? So fruits of the fourth year would we mark with clumps of earth. Fruits of Arla, which are the first 3 years, with pottery shards. And that Mishnah here in the Talmud goes on to explain why those specific indicators. But Rabbi Shimon, the son of Gamliel, says, this is all stated in the sabbatical year when the fruits are abandoned property. In the other years, however, feed the evildoer and let him die. What does that mean? So Rabbi Shimon says, 1 second. Why should I go around and mark my fruits so people should know which are forbidden by the Torah because it's the first 3 years or whatever? It's on my property. Nobody has any business of being on my property picking my fruits. If they're going to eat my fruits, too bad on them. I'm not going to service the thieves by advising them which ones are kosher and which ones are not. Therefore, Rabbi Shimon says that all of this of marking the fruits only applies in the sabbatical year. The sabbatical year, the Shemitah year, is the 7th year of every cycle. What happens in that year is we don't work the fields, and whatever does grow in the fields on its own is considered abandoned property. It's free for all. We can eat it, the animals can eat it, poor people can eat it. That's the Torah's mitzvah. So in the 7th year, people are allowed to go onto my property and take fruits. And that's when I have to leave an indicator so they should know which are the forbidden fruits and not touch it. But in all the other years, Rabbi Shimon says, in the other years, feed the evildoer and let him die. In other words, you're going to steal and break into my property and steal my fruits? Go right ahead. I'm not going to tell you which one of those are the good ones and which are the bad ones. That'll be on you. What does this tell us? Maybe this can indicate something about the poison sandwich, for example. So the kid poisons the sandwich so that when the thief steals the sandwich, he should be discovered, even though he will be possibly hurt. And we say, you can't poison people. And he says, people shouldn't be breaking into my bag and stealing my sandwich. Sounds a little similar to Rabbi Shimon is saying, where he says, feed the wicked and let him die. If you're going to break in and steal, you're not going to be afforded the courtesy of protection or to be told which are the permitted kosher fruits and which are the fruits you should not be eating. That's one way to read it. It would seem that this might be an indicator that it might actually be okay to trap a burglar. Put a booby trap on your door. You get hurt, what are you doing at my door? Maybe even use a spring gun. But as with everything else in Talmudic law, it's not so simple. Because there's another reading, and this one is going to be a little complicated again, but we're going to try. This talks about Meiser. Meiser is tithing. Now, tithing, some of you may have heard about this from non-Jewish sources. Tithing means we take 10%, the first 10% of the produce, and we give it to the Kohen. And actually, there are multiple tithes that are removed. First 2%, and then 10%, then another 10% for the poor. Now, what's interesting is that in Jewish law, this is not just a tax. You know, if it was a tax, you pay the tax now, you pay the tax before April 15th. Whenever you pay up, before the IRS gets you, you're okay. But if, in this case, it's actually a religious requirement. Before the tithes, before the 10% is removed from the produce, the food is not considered kosher, it's forbidden to eat it. In the land of Israel, where this mitzvah applies, you got to be pretty careful about this. So Here we deal with a situation of people who we don't trust to actually be tithing the food, so we don't know if it's kosher. Let's read that. One who gives flour to an innkeeper to prepare it for the meal. So apparently, way back when, the wayside inns weren't very well stocked, and you couldn't just show up at a little Motel 6 on the side of the road and expect them to have bed and breakfast for you. You had to actually bring your own flour, and they would use your flour to prepare your meal. So someone who gives flour to the innkeeper to prepare, he must tithe what he gives to her and what he takes back from her, because she's suspected of exchanging it with her own produce. So we don't trust the innkeeper, and we assume that I give her my extra special whole wheat, whatever flour I have, and she gives me back not necessarily the same flour. She might give me the worst flour in the house, baked into bread. So here's where we have a problem. I can't eat her bread because maybe she didn't tithe the flour. So when I take the bread from her, I have to tithe it again, just in case it's not my original flour and it hasn't been tithed, which would mean it isn't kosher. But the Mishnah also said that he must tithe what he gives to her. And that means when I give the flour to the innkeeper, I also tithe it before I give it to her. In case she keeps my flour and she eats it, I don't want to cause her to eat a non-kosher flour. That would seem to indicate that even though someone is being dishonest and taking my flour instead of returning it to me, I still take responsibility and make sure that they don't eat it. Make sure that that before I give it to them, I tithe it. So if they're going to eat it, that is going to be a kosher, legitimate flour. It seems like we try to protect even a thief. So we wouldn't leave a poisoned sandwich on our property and say, if you're going to break in, you're going to get hurt and it's on your account. Just like we wouldn't give the innkeeper the flour which wasn't tithed and say, if she's going to steal it, it'll be on her. Well, that's a little different than what we read about Rabbi Shimon saying, you don't have to mark the first 3 years of produce in your field. If someone's going to break into your field, let the evildoer eat it and die. Let them go and take it on their own head. It's their own problem. These two things don't seem to match up. Do we say, too bad on the thief, and I'm not going to protect them? Or do we say when we give something to the thief, we still have to make sure to give them something which is safe and not problematic in any way? How do we differentiate between these two readings? Does anybody want to suggest? Everybody's thinking. So I'll suggest that the later case, what we just read, is very different. If I give somebody something, I have to take responsibility for what I give. When I give the innkeeper flour, I'm proactively making a move. I can't give her flour that would be unkosher for her to eat. I would be proactively causing a problem. But if someone breaks into my field, I didn't do anything. They broke into my field. I don't have to protect them from eating the non-kosher grapes. That would seem to mean that maybe I shouldn't take a crowbar and beat the people that are trying to break in or steal my sandwich, like the example of that. But I can leave a hazard, and if the hazard gets them, it's on them. That would seem to be the conclusion here. And that's actually the conclusion that some rabbis make. On the other hand, we can also talk about this a little bit differently. When I have fruits growing in my field, like we talked about earlier, that are in the first 3 years, for example, when they're not considered kosher, they shouldn't be eaten. I didn't do anything at all. I didn't inject poison. I didn't set up a trap that's going to hurt someone. God said, the Torah says, don't eat these fruits. So I just planted business as usual. Torah says not to eat the fruits. I don't touch them. But I never tried to harm anyone. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon said, you don't need to put up signs for thieves to protect the thieves from taking the fruits. But in a situation where I am going to go ahead and build a trap, plant a spring gun, put a weak rope, or anything like that to hurt the intruder, maybe that is not allowed. Maybe I should not be using such harsh measures to prevent burglary. And that's why till this day you'll have this issue disputed among rabbis, whether or not you can set a trap that will wound or seriously harm an intruder, as opposed to just, getting an alarm system or another kind of a more simple system of defense. That's why, and we'll conclude with this, when you look back to this scenario that we had, that a thief gained entrance to an upper story of a dwelling by means of a rope. In order to prevent repeated burglary, may the owner of the house replace the rope with a weaker one that will snap and cause the burglar to fall and injure himself? So somebody actually asked the rabbi this question because it was a real life question pertaining to a clothesline. A thief was breaking into the top floor of a building using the clothesline. Can I put a weak clothesline that will cause the thief to fall? So the rabbi didn't want to get into trouble with this difficult question here. As we've seen, there's different ways to read these passages if it would give you a conclusion that supports that you can plant a trap for the burglar, or maybe you have to only be passive and you cannot proactively do something to hurt them. The rabbi simply said, why not remove the clothesline altogether so he can't get in? And that was the end of that story. With that, we conclude today's lesson. And before we end the live stream and take any questions, I just want to mention that Thursday we'll be continuing our series, Discover the Future, about the coming of the Mashiach. We do that in person behind the synagogue on Saunders Road, as well as here on Zoom and Facebook and YouTube. And Monday, we'll be starting a new series for a few weeks here on Zoom, discussing the high holidays that are coming up, how we're going to celebrate them, what's so significant about them, what's the way to do them right, and especially in this unique year when a lot of things that used to be simple are not simple anymore. So I hope to see you at these coming classes. And now we'll take any